Hi, the SI meteorologist Paul Dorian here. Well, we're now into the month of November, and it's time for the 2012-2013 winter outlook. Last winter, of course, was very mild here in the eastern part of the country with well above normal temperatures and very little snowfall relative to normal. The main factors last winter involved a La Nina condition in the tropical Pacific, or colder than normal temperatures, along with a positive phase of the North Atlantic Oscillation. I believe those factors will be considerably different this winter, and as a result, the winter will be quite a bit different as well, with colder than normal and snowier than normal conditions here in the Mid-Atlantic region. Well, let's kind of summarize this right up front in terms of the temperatures and snowfall for DC, Philly, and New York City. First of all, I believe that there will be above normal snowfall. Not necessarily blockbuster type winter or record-breaking type winter in terms of snowfall, but above normal with even higher amounts than this in the northern and western suburbs. And I believe it'll also be a colder than normal winter with a half a degree to 1.5 degrees below normal on average for the months including November. I believe that November actually will be a colder than normal and a quick start to winter. So this represents my expectations for November, December, January, and February. Now, in terms of the main factors this year, well, we have a negative PDO, or Pacific Decadal Oscillation. Lots of acronyms here, and we'll kind of discuss all of these over the next several minutes. Cold phase with the Pacific Ocean, a negative PDO, has occurred over the last few years, and it certainly should last right through the upcoming winter months. Meanwhile, in the tropical Pacific, it looks like we'll have a relatively neutral ENSO, or El Nino Southern Oscillation state, to perhaps a very weak El Nino condition. Earlier this summer, it looked like we might have a full-fledged El Nino, but that just did not materialize. Now it looks like more or less a neutral, or perhaps a best way to term it is a positive neutral condition in the tropical Pacific Ocean right through the upcoming winter months. The Atlantic Ocean remains in a warm phase, or a positive Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation phase. That should continue right through the winter months. Meanwhile, one of the wild cards here, and one of the toughest to forecast, is the North Atlantic Oscillation, which involves sea surface temperatures in the North Atlantic along with atmospheric pressure conditions up there. Last winter was predominantly a positive phase of the NAO, which played a big role in a warm winter here in the Mid-Atlantic region. I believe there are reasons to believe it should very well be a negative phase predominating this winter, and we'll talk about that over the next several minutes. A weak solar cycle, we'll take a brief look at that. That is, some research has indicated that a weak solar cycle tends to promote the likelihood of a negative NAO. And one final factor I always like to look at is a snowpack across North America. Our source region for the cold air is Canada and across the pole and Siberia. And if there's above normal snowfall, which there is right now, that tends to be bullish sign for colder than normal weather here in the Mid-Atlantic region. Well, we'll kind of want to highlight right up front some of the main points I want to make over the next several minutes, just so we have it here in word format. First of all, again, I believe the ENSO state will remain relatively neutral to perhaps a very weak El Nino right through the upcoming winter months. I don't see any chance that weak El Nino will evolve into a strong El Nino based on the negative PDO. Historically, a negative PDO kind of inhibits the likelihood of a strong El Nino, or long-lasting El Ninos for that matter. We ought to have a more active southern branch of the jet stream this winter compared to last winter. Last winter, of course, we had very few, if any, true coastal storms along the East Coast. But I think with the very weak El Nino, we should have a little bit more of an active southern branch of the jet stream. At the same time, we'll have an active northern branch of the jet stream that pulls in colder air from Canada into the Mid-Atlantic region over the upcoming winter. Again, we talked about earlier, one of the toughest to forecast is the NAO. I think there are reasons to believe we'll have a negative NAO most of the time over the upcoming winter. We've had a negative NAO over the last several months predominate, and a few of the reasons why: a weak solar cycle, a positive AMO, and a tripolar sea surface temperature anomaly pattern in the Atlantic Ocean with warm, cold, and warm all of these researches indicate all these three signs here point to a negative NAO type of weather pattern. I think we'll have an early start to winter with a cold November, traditionally or climatologically speaking, with an active tropical season during the month of October, along with a positive AMO. We tend to have an early start to the winter, so a colder than normal month of November is expected, perhaps even with some snow. Looked at a lot of analog years, and specifically for the neutral ENSO here, there's 5 different years that had similar conditions here, and we'll kind of look at what kind of temperature anomalies and precipitation anomalies we found for those particular analog years. Meanwhile, out west, probably warmer than normal conditions out in the Rocky Mountains. However, they'll probably have normal snowfall amounts and normal precipitation amounts. No big signal showing up for California. Probably relatively normal winter for California in terms of temperatures and precipitation. Well, let's first start off by looking at sea surface temperature anomalies. Oceanic cycles are very important whenever dealing with long-range forecasting. We talked about the negative PDO. Well, blues here represent colder than normal temperatures, and here you kind of have a classic negative PDO signature with a horseshoe shape, colder than normal temperature pattern, some warmer than normal right in the middle of that. That should persist for right through the winter months. It's been around for the last few years. Meanwhile, here's the latitude of the equator, and right off the South American west coast, you have some above normal temperatures, but also some below normal temperatures. And this is all leading me to believe we'll have a positive neutral, let's call it. Anywhere from neutral to very weak El Nino conditions. I do not expect a strong El Nino. It's a mixture right now of below normal and above normal temperatures. Last winter, this was all blue here. La Nina, colder than normal temperature pattern in the tropical Pacific. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic Ocean, still relatively warm overall with a plus AMO or positive phase of the Atlantic multi-decadal oscillation. But a couple things I'd like to highlight here. First of all, this tripolar pattern I was talking about earlier. Warmer than normal temperatures here, colder than normal here, and warmer than normal temperatures here. There's some research that indicates that this kind of a tripolar sea surface temperature anomaly pattern in the Atlantic leads to more negative NAO weather patterns. So that's a factor in the forecast for this year. Finally, right off the northeast and mid-Atlantic coast, some way above normal sea surface temperatures here. That should kind of be a boosting effect for some East Coast storms this winter. It tends to help to strengthen East Coast storms. So that's another factor I wanted to point out here. Now here's a chart from NOAA that just kind of confirms the negative PDO here. The blues here represent negative PDO pattern, and we slipped into a negative phase a few years ago. Interestingly, it's very similar to what occurred during the 1950s when we had negative PDO. At that time, we also had a positive AMO, just like now. So there's some similarities to what we have right now compared to the 1950s. In fact, in the 1950s, there were several hurricanes that struck the East Coast, and sure enough, now we had Irene last summer, and just in recent times here, we had Hurricane Sandy. So some similarities to the hurricane situation along the East Coast, as we have a negative PDO phase here like we did back in the 1950s. Well, in terms of the tropical Pacific Ocean, here's another plot that we've shown before that has a series of dynamical models and statistical models with regard to ENSO predictions, the El Nino Southern Oscillation predictions. Anything above this particular line represents El Nino conditions. Here's the December, January, and February rolling 3-month average here. And for the most part, these models tend to predict a weak El Nino. One particular model is below the line, a La Nina. However, the trend of these has been down. This is from mid-October. They put this out monthly, and I believe it'll continue to kind of drop down closer to a neutral position. So what I take away from this, based on the given trend over the last few months, is that it'll be anywhere from neutral to a very weak El Nino condition in the tropical Pacific this upcoming winter. Well, what kind of impact can a neutral or a positive neutral type of ENSO condition have on temperature pattern? Well, I talked earlier about analog years. There are 5 analog years that have very similar positive neutral or near neutral conditions in the tropical Pacific. And look at this, the temperature pattern for the almost the entire country, other than central and southern Florida, was colder than normal in these particular years. So if this is any indication, looks like we'll have a cold winter here, given the neutral condition or maybe slightly above neutral condition of the tropical Pacific. Again, in the mid-Atlantic region, definitely below normal temperatures here, and this is for the December, January, and February time frame for these particular analog years. Well, how about precipitation anomalies for those same analog years? Well, here it is, and anything blue and green here is above normal precipitation-wise, so it looks like kind of an active year in the east, along the east coast for these particular 5 analog years with neutral ENSO states. So this kind of leads me to, again, support the forecast for slightly above normal precipitation amounts and slightly above normal snowfall conditions given the colder than normal temperature state. Here's an interesting table that was put together by Tony Gigi of the Philadelphia National Weather Service office a few years ago. And again, I believe we'll be in a neutral, or what they call here a la nada, neutral ENSO state or a weak El Nino state. And here's the Philadelphia snowfall as a function of the ENSO state. And basically for neutral conditions, over the years, Philadelphia has had relatively normal snowfall. But for weak El Nino, the highest snowfall totals of all these possible scenarios has occurred in the weak El Nino years. Again, I think we'll be somewhere in the middle here. So above normal, but not quite a record-breaking type year or a blockbuster type year, but above normal, somewhere in the middle of neutral and weak El Nino type seasons. Well, here's another graphic that I found that has the snowfall for several cities in neutral type tropical Pacific conditions over the years. And again, for the most part, just like the Philadelphia table we saw a moment ago, typically slightly above normal snowfall results in neutral conditions. Here's Washington, D.C., for example. And the red here is the average snowfall for those neutral years, whereas the blue is climatology. Similar in Baltimore here, for example, and Central Park right here in New York City and Philadelphia. All of these have slightly above normal snowfalls in these neutral ENSO years compared to climatology or compared to the climatological normal. So this is just kind of another indication from history that shows somewhat above normal snowfall in neutral ENSO states for the Mid-Atlantic. Well, how important is the North Atlantic Oscillation? Well, last winter we had a positive North Atlantic Oscillation throughout much of the winter, and I believe that will not happen this year. I believe we'll have more of a negative NAO, and we'll talk about that over the next few minutes. Why is that important? Well, take a look at this. This is neutral conditions right here, or it's referred to as La Nada. For positive NAO, it's also correlated with the Arctic Oscillation, or negative NAO here. Quite a difference. Here you have temperatures throughout the eastern half of the country way above normal, whereas with a negative NAO, with neutral ENSO state, temperatures are way below normal. Again, I'm kind of favoring this particular scenario right here, but you can see if it turned out the NAO was very positive based on history here, it very well could mean a warm winter. But again, I believe we're leaning towards negative NAO. We've had a negative NAO predominating over the last several months, and I believe that'll continue over the winter months. Well, one of the reasons I favor the negative NAO for the upcoming winter has to do with some research that indicates if there's a tripolar sea surface temperature anomaly condition in the Atlantic Ocean, it tends to favor negative NAO weather patterns. And here is a climatological reading going back to from 1949 to 2009 for negative NAO type seasons, wintertime, December to February. And here you go with this tripolar pattern here of warmer than normal, colder than normal, and warmer than normal in the Atlantic Ocean. And again, that's the pattern we've had for the last several months, and we've had a negative NAO. I believe that pattern could very well occur right through the upcoming winter months. This is one main reason I believe negative NAO will dominate over the winter. Why is that important? Well, cold air tends to get more, is able to be sustained in the Mid-Atlantic region with a negative NAO. As opposed to last winter, we did have mostly positive NAO. Cold air did come in at times. We had cold air outbreaks, but they just did not last long. They kind of moved through quite rapidly. With a negative NAO, you could have a blocking pattern set up in the atmosphere, and you can sustain cold air in the Mid-Atlantic and northeastern part of the country. Well, there's also been some research that indicates a weak solar cycle tends to favor negative NAO type weather patterns. And even though we are in the midst of a solar cycle nearing a solar maximum that should occur sometime during 2013, this has been a relatively weak solar cycle. In fact, right now the sunspot numbers are under 50, about 48 or so currently. And again, this solar cycle has been relatively weak, and certainly compared to the last couple of solar cycles, this has been basically a weak solar cycle. So if anything, this is anywhere from a neutral to a bullish sign for negative NAO, if in fact weak solar cycles favor negative NAO type weather patterns. Well, one of the final factors I'd like to talk about today is the snowpack in North America, or the Northern Hemisphere. This is very important in terms of the source region for the cold air here in the Mid-Atlantic region. Our cold air comes from Canada or across the pole over in Siberia, so the snowpack relative to normal is often seen as an important factor. And sure enough, right now here we have green representing the climatological snowfall or snowpack this time of the year. And notice in this region right here, we have snow, which is more extensive than climatological history would show us, and also here in southwestern and south central Canada. So there's more snow compared to normal right now to our north, where the cold air comes. This is a bullish sign for cold air during the upcoming winter months. Well, this particular plot, as well as that last graphic, were put together by Dr. Bob Hart at Florida State University. And this is another one that shows the above normal snowfall or snow cover right now compared to climatology. Here the black line here represents the current snow cover, and the green line is the climatology from 1995 to 2009. So it's quite evident here that we are above normal in terms of snowpack. The extent of the snowpack right now in the Northern Hemisphere is just another way to look at it. Here, all the blues here represent above normal snow cover in the Northern Hemisphere for this time of the year, and that is a bullish sign for cold weather here in the Mid-Atlantic region. Well, let's get back to the starting point here. This is the summary chart that we showed right up front. Now that we went over all the factors again, it looks like it'll be quite a different winter this season compared to last season in the Mid-Atlantic region. I believe it'll be colder than normal and snowier than normal, quite different from last year. And the main factors we talked about listed below, a negative NAO combined with a neutral ENSO state, are some of the main factors here. So we'll, of course, monitor the situation over the next several weeks and update things as warranted at the siweather.com. That's it for now. For the siweather.com, I'm the SI meteorologist, Paul Dorian.